We explored just the origins of the phenomenon, how comics were out pretty quick, along with the animated series. The animated series, of course, was the first thing that, entered people's consciousness. And when it comes to other things, such as the novels, graphic novels, or I like to say, extended storylines of the comics that are effectively graphic novels, video games, and things that just kind of play off each other. We can still talk more about the RPGs. We certainly talked about that last time. We will talk about the music as well this time around, and we will certainly dive right into, or very soon, into the story Bible, the coveted Robotech II Sentinels story Bible by Carl Macek himself for the ill-fated, the unproduced Robotech II Sentinels series. There was that video that he was able to put out with the available animation. After that, we had the novelization taking a lot of concepts from the story Bible. And this gentleman right here, he has known James Lucino the longest of any fans that I'm aware of. Going back to the 90s, right? Yeah. So, and Jim Lucino, myself, the writer Bill Spangler, we shared panels that I had hosted at Anime LA back in January. Peter was there as well. Can't have a little part about him. Jim introduced the story Bible. It doesn't look like this. We don't have that actually on us. It's Pete's copy of it. We introduced it on our panel, and it was wow. Okay, started wheels turning in everyone's head. Pete's in particular. Because you do live a bit close to him. So Pete has been instrumental in just helping Jim grant just a few fans some access. Still maybe very much the property of Harmon Gold. We'll just not concentrating too much on that, but think about what we had learned from that and discuss what we learned from it, because Pete and I dived pretty deep into reading that story Bible. Ever since he helped Jim out with just granting a bit of access to it. So anyway, I'm gonna travel around this thing. So
So while Bryant brings up some info about it, let me tell you a little bit more about the story Bible. This was, as Bryant said, this was sort of the long lost missing link about what was supposed to happen in the Sentinels. And what we have as fans is we have the novelizations, and then we have some information that Macek put in Robotech RT40, where the first 10 episodes are summarized in detail, and subsequently he kind of summarizes each week, which is a 5-episode block, and the events of that, but he doesn't have it in any detail. And you can see a little bit after having read the story Bible that even through this, his thinking was evolving about what was happening in it. This is information I have from James Lucino, that the story Bible was produced in the fall of 1985. Robotech was a hit on television, and James was, or Carl Macek was looking for funding to get a sequel produced. And so he had some ideas for a sequel. They're based on his own conception of what Robotech was about, because Carl was one participant in many of the creation of that show. And he, in the process of sort of, how are you going to pitch this to potential investors? And so he wrote the story Bible, and he wrote 65 episodes worth of plot summaries, And his intent was not that this is the finished story, but that he wanted to demonstrate that he had the full 65 episode minimum syndication run worth of material that could be adapted, so to show the potential investors that he was serious. And I don't know how familiar you are with the story of what happened. Two things: they had the funding all lined up, they started to produce the animation, there were some hiccups with the animation. For example, Macek writes about the fact that the Japanese artists were actually much more interested in the new characters than they were in the legacy Macross characters. They were not particularly interested in retreading, ground that had already been walked upon. And so Carl, there was that conflict, but then two things happened. First of all, Matchbox's toy line was massively underperforming, and Matchbox was providing approximately 50% of the funding for the Sentinels, and so Matchbox pulls its funding. The second thing that happened is Ronald Reagan started a trade war with Japan, and almost overnight, the value of the dollar with respect to the yen dropped by half. It was like 110 yen to the dollar to 220, something along those lines. And so the US dollar investment that they prepared to animate it went from fully funding this show to now 1/4 of the necessary funding. At that point, the project collapses, and there will never be another fully realized Robotech sequel. There was an attempt by a new crew in the early 2000s that produced Shadow Chronicles that did not perform well enough to justify sequels. There was a Kickstarter campaign to start a sequel called Robotech Academy. I don't even think that got out of Kickstarter. So what we have here is Carl's book. It was produced in fall of '85. Again, primarily intended to show that he had enough story to create an entire series out of it.
Yeah, that's So it's the thing is with Carl, he gets right back up, during this time period of really trying to continue Robotech. So first ones to do it, okay, right, are the authors, and when it comes to the authors, James Luceno, okay, as well as Brian Daly, they take over what Carl has done with the Story Bible, and Carl says to him, hey, do what you want with it. You don't even necessarily have to use any of it, but here's what I put together, So he was very dismissive. Jim, as he would say, what we would agree, was very dismissive to, Carl was very dismissive of his own Story Bible, that yes, he was in a rush to put it in, to get it done for potential funding and stuff. But Jim, and I think as well as Brian Daly, thought, okay, you know what, we can, actually there's some great stuff in this. That is what Jim has said. Now when it comes to a lot of people who are very, well versed in the story, either know the novels or have their own version of the Robotech epic in their head, may potentially think differently. I know Pete may have some thoughts on that, but Jim has said that, a lot of terrific ideas are in this, and then they use, in his words, all of it in one way or the other. Although, to be frank, there are very much differences, and we're going to go into that very shortly. But from that manuscript, the Story Bible, okay, we get Robotech novels from those two gentlemen. Brian Daly, okay, he had passed sometime in the 90s, okay, so after the 18th book, which is the last one in chronological order, Jim continues as Jack McKinney and works on 3 more books, okay, 3 more books. So that's the pair right here. It's a classic picture of them. All right, Brian in Vietnam. So Brian, he was able to really use his own kind of military tendencies and experience and incorporate that into the books, right? With, for instance, Robotech Genesis, it begins with, or has a really terrific passage, okay, that throws you into what it's like to fight alien battlecraft or fighters in their own vehicles in the skies of Earth. Okay, yes, but majority of the fighting takes place in space, takes place within our solar system, but man, it's like this first battle, to just have this prose version of it, you see it in a different light. You see it with like a veteran's perspective. Though yes, Brian was in the cavalry during Vietnam, but he was very much made for military sci-fi, and they had military sci-fi leanings, both Brian and Jim. Jim, he was an army brat growing up. His father would constantly move the family because of his job as being a serviceman, right? So anyway, here's a passage from Genesis as the Zentradi battle pods attack SDF-1 for the first time. It's Zentradi attacking for the SDF-1 first time, and it's in the airs and the skies of Earth and on land as well. Okay, Skull Leader to Veritech Squadron intercept new invader flights at Zone 428. Traffic's pretty heavy out there, boys, so break formation, but don't leave your wingman. Roy sounded out of breath. Rick looked up, open mouth, as a Veritech flying the Jolly Roger insignia bagged an alien recon craft shaped something like a flying bottle. Debris was raining everywhere. Pilots from both sides screamed in agony as they were blown to oblivion where sky met space. And because dogfighting was so incredibly demanding physically, the TACnet was loud with gasps and grunting. Dogfighters trained themselves to lock the muscles of their lower bodies, turn their legs to iron, suck their gut into the spine, I think to keep the blood up high in the head, up in the brain where it was needed even more than in the heart. The pressure on the pilots' diaphragms was fearsome. They could draw only short, hard-won breaths if they were in high G maneuvers. The TACnet sounded like 8 or 10 wrestling teams had been paired off for the championship. The trophy was Earth. I think it ends with the perspective of humans being attacked by alien warcraft. You're thinking about Earth, although ultimately the Zentradi were after the SDF-1. So honestly, that is one of my favorite passages. I brought this up back in my panel in Anime LA. And it was written by Brian Daley, who wrote the first novel. Okay, I know someone, a serviceman at work. He's a teacher himself, is like me. He teaches shop class. He never fought, but he's a serviceman who was in a land-based Navy unit. They would do all sorts of gravity tests, and he told me he was a human test subject, or human test subject, which, okay, it's accurate, but it sounded sort of strange, like human guinea pig or something, right? But that's what he told me. They would do gravity tests on some contraption, and he told me that he's able to withstand up to 12.5 Gs. Okay, that sounds like a lot, right? Would you agree? It sounds like a lot. It's like, darn. So things like this. I might think about this passage. Then it gives me an excuse to geek out about Robotech II. And he would tell me that for any cocky pilots they would encounter, they would put them through something like this, or have them go into high G rolls, in the backseat of a fighter, and for the purposes of trying to make them vomit or something. So it's stuff like this that just keeps giving and giving. So it's reward after reward for just taking this stuff seriously. And they were given an instruction by Carl Mason, make it more adult, and they collabed, or brainstormed on things that were influences, comic books, movies, Dune, right? Dune. If you read Dune, there are epigraphs. Those little passages right in the beginning of a chapter that, in a way, it gives you a bit of insight either on the chapter or the overall story. As a tip of the hat to Dune, okay. Jim starts to use the epigraphs for novel 2. Okay, so the two men are like very, in contact with what they're doing with the novel. So as Brian's working on novel 1, all right, and Brian's checking out what Jim's doing. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna start doing the epigraphs too. And so, because proto-culture, the splice in Dune, very similar the way Carl sees proto-culture, and the two gentlemen certainly rolled with that. But let's see. So, also a reminder, okay, toward the end we will have some audience participation in which you will qualify for free stuff, which I mentioned yesterday. But so it's really wonderful things. Let's see. Now, when it comes to like certain things, we can talk, about what we like about the books, novels, because we both have strong opinions between Peter and I. To put it somewhat nicely, Jim and Peter, they got into some lively discussions on the old Usenet groups in the 90s. Okay, and it's like, I'm thinking, man, Peter's giving Jim a hard time here. And I started an email correspondence with Jim, good deal later than Peter had, but it's all because hey, Pete, a lot of other guys, me, we're all fans in our own way. Pete and some others have been labeled purists. For lack of a better term, I adopted inclusionist for a little while. Then I decided, I don't quite want to settle with that. I don't want to necessarily want to label, but I'm thinking expansionist might be more appropriate. Not every piece of Robotech literature that comes out, whether comic book or comics, to be honest, or even animated things like Shadow Chronicles. Don't get either one of us started on Shadow Chronicles or my cup of tea, right? But I do have an expanded look at things, the material. Peter, though, is well versed on much of the material, and he's well versed in his own way, whether he likes it or not. So, he likes to keep informed. So that's good. But so I sort of brought up this is what I like. Maybe Pete will start off with, if anything, what do you like about the novels?
Well, I thought the novels, as this is someone, I guess before I answer this question, let me sort of summarize my position and in fandom as, I got the term purist assigned to me. I did not choose that term either. And my perspective is that I got into Robotech because of the show. I loved the show. And what I found as the online discourse continued through the 90s is I found that most fans, and to a certain extent the adaptations, were either glossing over or had missed a lot of the small references and small cues within the show that do a lot of the world building. And in some cases with the novels, because the novels are actually certainly the first novels where they're adapting the TV series, are a reasonably faithful adaptation of the series that are expanding it into character motivations. I think they're well written, I think they're engaging, but at many points, I think Jim and Brian encountered things that didn't make sense at the moment. And I describe myself as a Robotech scholar. I've been studying the show for 40 years. This has resulted in several fanfics of note, but most importantly, the Robotech Reference Guide, if any of you are familiar with that, which became sort of the hub for technical stuff about Robotech, and then spun off into essays where I would write about, taking what little cues we had from the show and then spinning them out into a history of Tyrol or how protoculture works, and how the flower of life cycle works. And that actually ties into a story about with Jim. But I think the one thing I've had that Jim and the comics writers, or what I did not have that Jim and the comic writers had, was a deadline. I never had a deadline. So as they're going through this series and adapting it, they're finding things that don't immediately make sense. And so they're little loose threads, and the general instinct while adapting was to snip off the loose thread and to clean it up, tidy it up. There comes the discussion of what do you do with what's obviously a flaw in the series. The example you brought up was Scott swimming to rescue someone from the water, and then in a later episode says he can't swim. Well, you can either say that's a flub, or you could say Scott doesn't want to go into the water and is making excuses. You can have an in-universe explanation, or you can have an out-of-universe explanation. And so my goal as a fan has been really to focus on taking those loose threads and following what does this imply about the universe that might not have been noticed if you snip off that loose thread. And so my approach to my critique of the novels has been largely that they added certain things that I think internally create internal contradictions, but also that they snip off these loose threads, which I find terribly interesting. That said, I've read all the novels, although many, many years ago. I found them all very engaging, and I had some wonderful conversations with Jim Lucino. One of them was, and one of my ongoing criticism was, the choice, and this ultimately we'll find out here, was Macek's choice to take Robotech into a mystical direction. Whereas the show only has a few mystical moments that you're kind of, WTF, what's going on here? But it's still mostly very grounded. Whereas Macek really wanted to push that. And Jim and Brian followed that lead. And we had a wonderful discussion where I said, I was complaining about protoculture being made completely mystical. And Jim said, well, if you think you can make an explanation of protoculture that's non-mystical, then go right ahead. And so I took this as a challenge, and so I wrote a short essay about how protoculture basically uses cold fusion by wrapping lithium and deuterium ions into protein chains, and uses that to break through its shell, and the whole, why it's trying to break out of its shell, because it needs to be partially digested, and the whole life cycle of it. And Jim was so impressed by this, he put that in an epigraph in his final book. Did not tell me he was going to do that. I didn't know it till I got a free copy, shows up in the mail. So.
Yeah, that's the book. That's displayed chapter 3 up before the end of the storm, 21st book. The last of the series, not the last in chronological order, but yeah, chapter 3. I remember that very well. Peter Walker, the name Peter Walker falls. Peter Walker's own quote about explanation of protoculture, right? It's right. Jim's like was so impressed, like that. Yeah, it's really good. It's stop that in there. Yeah, writers do love doing that. Okay, incorporating fans' names into the work or friends, acquaintances. Because I had one as well by Bill Spangler. Yeah, so it's just he was able to just all right. I keep running into this guy at work. We both work at a newspaper, a local newspaper, and and I'm just imagining what he's thinking. He probably didn't think this, okay? But I would ask him about Robotech. It's like, wow. It's like, all right, this guy's comics I've been reading, and he's actually doing freelance articles for this paper that I was interning for, And of course I'm going to talk to him about Robotech, But yeah, Bill is the most respected comic book writer of the series, and it certainly has had the most impact on the novel series for sure. Because the Malcontent Uprisings, is something that he's very, very well known for. So to promote the Malcontent Uprisings, which takes on the Robotech II Sentinels, is part of his title. But it deals with the Zentradi, how they're treated by friend and foe like post-war. Chiron does this massive attack, destroys the SDF-1 in the last episode of Macross, right? Destroys himself in the process, takes out the vast majority of the British crew. Anyway, but if we think that everything's going to be a-okay and Zentradi and humans are going to, sing Kumbaya and hold hands, no, we know this from just being ourselves, right? Things don't just die down. That's like, even when, the historians might say, okay, the Robotech War ended when Captain Global and SCF-1 took on Dolza, and the Earth got blasted back to the Stone Age. Oh, by the way, how many stories started off with Earth looking pretty good, then midway an apocalypse happens. So many sci-fi stories are post-apocalyptic. I think Robotech / Macross is unique in that. Okay, yes, there are high stakes. We talk about this. We've always bring this up. Knee-jerk reaction to a lot of people say, "Oh, we kill people." It's like Peter and I discuss this. Yeah, let's not always say that right off. But there are high stakes. Yes, people do perish. But here's the thing with Robotech and the series. You're using material that makes us care for these characters. We laugh with them, we cry with them, we mourn with them, But anyway, so Bill, he took this one phrase, malcontent uprisings, that was mentioned in Sentinels Book 1, of this time period of, Zentradi bands or Zentradi who are attacking, continuing their warlike ways, okay? And he explores that. Explores Zentradi rights, and then Macek is protesting, and then Leonard. It's controversial in the way he's treated by some of the material. Bill and Jim, they've gone in the direction of not casting Leonard in a great light, but I think Leonard serves a certain purpose of that. He represents that side of humans where, hey. We have just cause to wage war as ourselves against this people. Okay, now this great tagline here on the poster. Everyone thought the first Robotech War was over. Everyone was wrong. Okay, Bill came up with that one. But yeah, and also to tie into a few things. I also want to point out, Bill, using his journalism background, he wrote about certain events, certain background stuff about Robotech, in an article sort of way, fan article sort of way. So not fan, but actual mock article sort of way. Jonathan Wolf has never been explored more deeply than with the comic book, and that's including the novels take on things with Jonathan Wolf. Okay, so anyway, here's a shout out to me. Peter got his shout out. My shout out was okay. A prequel series, Return of Macross. Someone is killing a bunch of scientists, or a bunch of people related to the Robotech project. This guy in the jet black hair is sort of a terrorist. Roy, he encounters him, tries to keep him from killing a potential alien clone here, but he still manages to stab the clone in that left-hand page. Roy knocks him around, or gets knocked too. Okay, and that's a Hailmaker. And then at the end of it, okay, as the security comes in, one of you help Lieutenant Foker handcuff the man on the floor. The other one should go look for Dr. Shiu, although he may be too late, right? So, yes, my last name is Shiu. I was surprised, delighted, and pretty fun. It was just pretty funny. And then, and I thought about this. If anyone's going to be a doctor in the family, it's sure as hell not going to be me. You did think about me as, I'm casting in an off-panel way Bryant as Dr. Shiu. Many years later, my brother becomes a doctor. Actually, becomes a doctor. And a very specialized one, but still a doctor. So these guys shout outs, yeah. we're a select group here. Robotech Pros giving us shout outs. I know. But before we swing back to the story Bible, okay, and things, you've come up with a certain estimations. I mean, here's the thing. From lack of a better label, a purist standpoint, and Peter is a particular kind of purist, because he's, say how do you approach the material, and when you write your own fan fiction, what do you do?
Well, I think my perspective is that the show, you've got to sort of pick when you're working within a continuity, whether you're a licensed writer or a fanfic writer, or as I like to say, an unlicensed licensed material writer. You've got to pick sort of what is your reality, and now some people are very flexible about that. Macross, everything in Macross is real, even if it contradicts itself. So I guess that's what the Red Queen approach to, it can be contradictory and you still don't care, but you have to pick a certain continuity. So my interest has always been primarily the show. I started with the show, the first thing I ever saw was Codename Robotech, which was the clip show that aired the weekend before the show actually started airing. So I was with it from the very beginning. I think the only other fans I know that were with it longer were Tom Bateman and Dennis Bateman, who Tom actually worked for Harmony Gold for a while. And they got started because they learned about the Macross adaptation, and then made a connection with Macek and hung out at his art gallery, and were buddies with him when they were teenagers. But my perspective has always been what events as you see them in the show are true. That doesn't mean that when a character says something, that's fact. Characters can be wrong, characters can be mistaken. Characters can make polite excuses for things they don't want to do. But the perspective is the show is the canon and the other stuff are essentially apocryphal. And so when I look at, from the perspective of the show, I want to see these details sort of reflected in any expansion of the material. I want to see, hey, there's this obscure reference to, the great example is the Robotech Masters are mulling over what might have happened to their fleet, and they say either the disciples of Zor have captured the battle fortress and have launched a new offensive against our Zentradi forces, or the Invent have beaten us to the prize. And we're like, who are these disciples of Zor guys? Because they are never mentioned again. But they are a force large enough to launch offensives against the Zentradi, who we recall are a fleet of over 5.8 million warships, the 4.8 of Dolza's and the 1 million in under Britai's command when he was given the Imperial fleet. Who are the disciples of Zor? How are they big enough to actually launch offensives against the Zentradi? And where do they go? Why do we never see them again? And so as a fanfic writer, and either in writing fiction or writing sort of fictional history, when you go into write an essay in universe, my interest is following those threads that are in the show. And of course, in the novelizations and other sources, that's a very uncomfortable thing because it doesn't make any sense on the surface level. So you'll see people who are adapting it just kind of sweep that under the rug. They become the children of Zor, which are a euphemism for humans, but that doesn't make sense when you think about it in the context. So that's kind of my approach to the adaptation of the show, and it informs how I judge and perceive other adaptations.
Well, so I have this one slide here. All right, it's a Zentradi way. Prisoners, yes. Hostages, no. Okay. So the show, that's Zentradi. They don't mind blowing up stuff. They don't mind using warlike tactics to somehow, reclaim the SDF-1. All right. They don't mind taking prisoners and interrogating them. Out of all the Zentradi, whether it's Britai, Dolza, other well-known Zentradi, Myria, they all about battling. And yes, the higher-ups may take prisoners to interrogate, ask them about proto-culture. Only one has taken hostages, and that's Chiron. Hostages seems like a good way to get what you want, right? Human beings have discovered that. It may not be honorable, no, But anyway, so Pete, real quick. So what is your take on that from the show?
Well, I think, and the other thing that you see Chiron do that is atypical of Zentradi is Chiron uses suicide bombers in Season's Greetings. You see all those Santas dressed up, and they have explosive vests and detonate around the city. So Chiron is clearly learning from the worst of human, battle tactics and operating, because Chiron is used to being the big dog. He's used to being, having overwhelming superiority over his opponents, but he's also a very cruel character. So he takes very quickly to asymmetric warfare and to the tactics used in asymmetric warfare. He's very clever in adapting to his circumstance of being in the weaker position. And so he uses what tactics he has available to him. And because they're intrinsically cruel, it amuses him.
What explanation is there in your mind for the rest of Zentradi? Is it something that just missing in their thought process, or what?
I think when you look at the show, at least, you see that the Zentradi are not the consummate warriors, that they're not Klingons. When you actually look at Bryant's ship and as Minmay's album and the trinkets from SDF-1 are brought on board by the spies, you see that the Zentradi themselves actually are very poorly disciplined. They're easily bored. You have talk of, like for example, when Chiron arrives for the first time, he and his officers are making bets about how many ships they're going to run into. This is not a disciplined force, at least in the show. They're very slack in their maintenance. We do actually see in the show the Zentradi performing some level of maintenance on their ships, and yet Bryant's the underbelly of his ship is got leaking pipes and pools of water, and so there's certainly they're not these super disciplined. They're not the U.S. Navy. They're not these highly disciplined warriors, and which makes you wonder if there's something wrong about the masters and the way the masters have trained them and programmed them, that they're not as effective as they might be, and they rely entirely upon overwhelming force because they're not disciplined. And you don't see that discipline until you see Miria and her squad, who are absolutely crackerjack, top-notch combatants, and they're absolutely no nonsense. And we have a brief exchange between Miria and her crew chief, which is a male crew chief, I should note. There is clearly discipline there that seems to be missing elsewhere in the show. And I know that the licensees, starting with Bill Spangler, have portrayed the Zentradi as kind of smooth-foreheaded Klingons with a warrior's way and ritual chants and ritual execution methods and things like that, which I think are great sci-fi concepts. But I, as a purist, wonder how well that fits in with the way we see them in the show, as they really kind of suck.
Yeah, they really kind of suck, but yeah. Peter and I have gone back and forth around different perspectives. So for me, I certainly don't mind that cultural kind of, or like playing on like kind of stuff or ritualistic. But hey, let's be honest. Both Star Trek and Robotech, via the lens of Bill Spangler and Jim Lucino, they all ripped off the Japanese. Okay, they all ripped off the Japanese and their ritualistic code of honor, the samurai code. That's okay. All right, so I think the Japanese had the most to complain about. All right, this also when they use stuff from Star Wars too, perhaps. But here's and for me, I think what's sort of what I think there's a certain like overconfidence for a force like this that Zentradi have over time, over how many years it is they've been around. So certain things sort of like are overlooked or forgotten. But also, I think it's important. I've come to appreciate that to give the Zentradi some kind of way of looking at themselves with respect. Okay, makes them just more enthusiastic in what they do. Miria, she's too good looking to be anything else, right? She's a proud warrior. She's seeking the best person to fight. I'm saying that, okay, I think there's indications that there's some kind of code going on. At least, Maria is the best pilot, arguably, okay? And so I think it works in terms of giving the Zentradi something that this is how we do things, this is what war means to us, okay? Now, the novels even explored it in a certain way that I find really interesting, and also covers, in my mind, a very obvious plot hole, but since I was pretty young, it didn't occur to me. Or what takes place in drama and fiction, there's a certain shell game writers do, or storytellers do. Whether they realize it or not, they're the writers themselves. We are taken by the images, the writing, the cool stuff, or whatever characters' problems are. Here's what the novels do, covering what honestly is could be considered a plot hole. Epigraph from chapter 10 of Battle Hymn. When you fail to grasp what you fail to grasp, this is in the words of Exodore, per the writers, the novelists. What you fail to grasp is that Commander Britai's decision to allow the SDA-1 to retreat was entirely in keeping with its Zentradi tradition of open warfare. That is, move and counter move. It was most certainly not a tactical blunder. Moreover, it is for precisely the same reason that it never even occurred to Commander-in-Chief Dolittle to hold the planet Earth hostage for the return of Zor's ship. Okay? Through no fault of your own, you imagine this to be unthinkable, which then is the more barbaric of the two races, yours or mine. Exodore, as quoted in Lapstein's interviews, one of the many zillion resources, fictional resources that their novels quote from. But I love this stuff. I love, the fact that so many of us, or maybe all of us, we look at novels to give us more detail, to explore things in a way that other mediums don't or won't or can't. Okay, so that's specific novels is go deeper, and provide these kinds of explanations. And it's like, I read this, and it's like, oh shit, that's right. It doesn't make any sense. The easiest thing for them to do is to take hostages, but they were able to explain this and make the Zentradi have a code, have some kind of code of what they do. And I think, to me, it's really good. It's really cool stuff. But that's where we go and write the story Bible, because this, guys, honestly, this is the first panel that will explore the story Bible. Jim, he managed to, have it in our presence, and yes, to bask in its presence back in January was something, okay? But to actually explore it is a whole nother thing. And for the first time anywhere, in any panel, any Robotech panel, we're going to dive right into this. And yes, at the end, we will be giving stuff away, okay? So please hang on. That's an extra incentive. But let's end it with this. I totally respect fan fiction writers because the material has meant so much to them that they are writing their stories. They're either adding to the lore, or interpreting, or reinterpreting, or doing both. Okay, he's coming in from, lack of a better term, a purist kind of way, and and I through his example, am very much tempted to do some fan fiction supporting what I love. The novels, way up there. I love them a lot. Okay, as much as the animated series, the comics, certain comics, the same, and so it's my point of view or your point of view more or less valid, or what? You tell me.
Well, obviously mine's the most valid. No, I think, and I'd like to talk about the story Bible now for a bit, and I'd like to talk as sort of a neutral standpoint as much as I can. I know I've said some some things about my opinion about it back at our booth. But I'd like to talk a little bit more of sort of my neutral observations of reading it. And the first observation is that when Jim Lucino and Brian Daly adapted the story Bible, they followed it fairly closely. And what they did is they and you can see there's a bunch of marginalia in here that are Jim Lucino's notes. And I had to ask him because there's two hands. One is writing in block print, one is writing in cursive. And Jim said, no, that's me. They're both me. Because I wasn't sure if some of those were Brian's or not. But the first thing I observed is that Carl didn't have a strong sense of scale. And this is very common in science fiction writers. The entire Robotech Expeditionary Force, including that faction that eventually goes off and joins the Sentinels, are 10,000 people. They sent 10,000 people and one ship to threaten the civilization that bombed Earth with 5.8 million 4-mile-long warships, or mile-long warships. So there's a missing sense of scale, and they go to these planets, and it's a sci-fi trope called the planet of hats. You go to a planet, everyone does one thing. The Carbonarans, or the Carbonites, as they called them in this, they're not Carbarans, they're Carbonites. I think they changed that because of Star Wars. But they have one little village, and all their children are held in a prison camp outside that village. It's an entire civilization. There's maybe 1,000 people. The Praxians, same, the Praxian Sisterhood, maybe 1,000 people. And so there's this extreme mismatch of scale. And I think that comes from, if you watch sci-fi fantasy that's geared towards younger audiences, they don't have a deep world building because they're like, we don't expect our audiences to keep track of all of that. Whereas if you watch the original Robotech, there are background characters everywhere, and they're doing things, they're interacting, and they're going on with their lives while the adventure that we watch is taking place. And this is true in all three sagas. A little less in the third saga, because the third saga is kind of the roving band trope that you see in a lot of, like the Hulk. He goes to a new town, has an adventure there, moves on. And that's what's supposed to happen in New Gym. But in Southern Cross and Macross, there is this, they're just part of this bigger story. That's entirely missing in this. The other thing that I think is interesting about Robotech is that Robotech is a generational story. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with, I guess it's from As You Like It, I believe, where Jenquist gives a speech. It's all of the world's a stage, and the men and women only players. And and he talks about the different stages of life. But at the end of your stage, at the end of your part in the play, you get off stage. And that's what I found so fascinating about Robotech, was that when each saga ended, and of course there are obviously real world reasons for this. They were 3 unrelated series that were adapted together. But this was a new way of doing storytelling, that each story is completely generational, and the characters from each generation do not appear in the next. There might be some tenuous connections, Dana being Maximilia's daughter, Stott clearly having some knowledge of Rick Hunter, who Rick Hunter is, beyond just simply by name reputation, even though that's just implied. And whereas Macek, and Macek is following in here that this is Macross, plus. This is not Macross plus, it's Macross, plus. It's a singular focus on the original Macross characters. Minmay, Lisa, Rick, Max, Miria, Exodor, Britai. The only new character that isn't an alien, and Lang. The only two new characters that get any screen time that are not aliens are Jack and Karen, the new young daring do characters who get to do the adventure-y things because they're younger. Janice, the sexy android, and boy howdy, I got sick of the phrase sexy android appearing over and over and over. She's in sexy android mode now. It's like, oh, cringe. And then the last character who gets screen time is Jonathan Wolf. And I guess T.R. Edwards as the villain. But you see almost no indication of other characters. You describe these battles, but no minor characters step up. There's no go into a village and you talk with this particular elder, or it's all so narrowly focused on our cast that you create a sense of smallness about it. And I think what McKinney was, the
the novelizations were very successful in doing, where they're taking this very limited scope that the story Bible has, and at least expanding it enough that you keep engaged, that you feel at least it's a little bit bigger than I think Carl conceived. And they can't fix that entirely. And I think because they did feel the need to be faithful to Carl's vision. The last thing that I noticed is, and I mentioned this before, is there are just a few mystical moments in Robotech. There's Dana's dream, which the show itself calls a hallucination. There's the Genesis pit, and then there's Rand's dream in Sandstorms. There's Rick's dream, but we don't talk about that because it has a magic flying bicycle. And he had a head injury, so we can attribute it to that. But there are a few mystical things that you can see which are a little weird, but they're not the norm for Robotech. And Macek seems to have really become very enamored of those and wanted to build the story around that. So what you see, for example, towards the end, is that Max and Miria's second daughter, for reasons that aren't really explained, because Dana has none of these powers, whenever she has like these massive psychic powers and ages dramatically every time she uses them, has deep knowledge of Zor, and what the last bit I wanted to talk about is that Macek clearly envisioned this having a third part. And what we know about the third part is that he sent a letter to the cast after the show was completed, saying that he intended for the SDF-3 to have gone back in time and for Rem and Minmay to have had married, and their child is Zor. Biologically questionable, but that Zor's clone and Minmay produce Zor and start the cycle all over again. And this was in an era where this sort of cyclic storytelling hadn't become the trope that it is now. So, I mean, those are kind of the observations that I get in the first, my first reading of it. I do see a lot of similarities to the novelizations. I think the novelization, my estimation of the novelizations has gone up because I sort of see what they're working with. That they're starting with a very limited story, a very narrowly scoped story, and they're trying to expand it into something that at least has some of the feel of the scope of the original. But it's missing, that generational aspect because, again, everybody's so narrowly focused on the Macross characters. But that's, I think, reflected in fandom. There are a lot of fans who are Macross fans and kind of tune out after episode 36. And, so I think that this might have appealed more to fans who are really absolutely Macross fans and not fans of Southern Cross in the new generation.
Right. It does certainly maybe work from a standpoint, but certain characters, often alien characters, Jim and Bryant, they explored them. They explored them, what they had to work with. They built up certain things about them, like whole cloth. And when it comes to my own observations, the story Bible, okay, I'm going to share some of them with you. All right. Okay. Who has seen the Robotech II Sentinels video? Raise your hand. Okay. Robotech II Sentinels video. All right. T.R. Edwards, an antagonistic member of the Pioneer Mission Expeditionary Force. Okay. Barges into Rick's quarters. Okay. Max is there to give him some advice or help him out with his wedding jitters because his wedding is like the next day or something. And Edwards just says like to Rick, what I'm hearing, I don't like being talked about behind my back. You have a problem with me. You got tell it to my face. I'm paraphrasing, okay? But it's like, wow, it's as much as I cherish that video as part of the lore. Honestly, guys, really going to talk to the superior officer that way. The novels, they took the spirit of that, of just T.R. Edwards being a jerk, okay? And just sort of subtly, okay, you know what? Hey, Hunter, I just want to wish you good luck. And Hunter goes, for what? The wedding. And then he goes to Max. Good luck to you too, Sterling. Just these. He just gives an impression to the two guys, you know, that I'm just busting your shoes in a very kind of like obscure kind of way, you know, and the two men shrug and stuff like that. And then, so the spirit of that, of him being a problem, foreshadowing him being a problem, is done. It's completed. But it's done in a way that, okay, he can still continue serving the REF. You know, he's not going to be booted out for obviously incredibly bad behavior, right? But the story Bible, it says that Edwards is Rick's second in command. Edwards is in charge of defensive plans, while Rick is in charge of offensive plans. Rick doesn't like Edwards, similar to Rick's attitude in the video and novels. Okay, all right. So, and then in the first engagement, that they have, all right, like the invid. Once STF-3 remanifests into normal space, right outside Tyrol, the invid are there. The masters are gone. Okay, but then all of a sudden there's an attack going on, and Rick, who's away from his war room, discovers that Edwards has taken over and has launched Mecha at the invid. Okay, and then they're engaged in the invid right off once they remanifest into normal space. Okay, and it was because of Edwards. Rick, of course, is not happy about this because it's like he skipped the chain of command. But the thing is, with novels, all right, yeah, he's definitely not second in command. He's definitely a high officer. Okay, these kind of command details are done by Rick, Vice Admiral, and Full Admiral Lisa Hayes. Okay, but they put up with him because of the politics. You know, the Southern Cross, the Southlands politics, as written by the novels and comic books by Bill Spangler. Okay, yes, politics just makes it more grounded. It's what we can relate to in real life. All right, different factions with different thoughts on how to do things. Okay, Leonard and the Southern Cross and the Southlands, they got to such like a high level of respect by people that they were able to influence things and have Edwards be part of this mission. So he will not be reprimanded. Rick cannot reprimand him according to the agreements he's got with him. So he has to put up with it. And so, but Edwards, he just makes it known that, you know, hey, you can't do anything with me without actually saying it. So I love that kind of stuff, dealing with that kind of things. Let's get some questions. All right, let's get some questions because we're sort of winding down. Who's got questions for us?
How do you feel about Robotech the movie?
You're a ringer, right? I talked about it last time. So I was in Dallas. I saw the premiere of the Robotech movie. Carl Macek was sitting 3 rows behind me. I was about to turn 16 years old. I think the Robotech movie I enjoyed it actually quite well at the time, but I immediately saw some problems with it. For example, it takes place simultaneous with the second Robotech War, but they don't take that opportunity to directly tie it into the events of the series. So I think it's a good start. I think it could have used a couple more passes in the editing bay. But yeah, and if you want to know more about that, come see us at I7, and I'll tell you all about it. And I have it on my iPad.
Sir, you have a question? You have a question?
I don't know, do you think the original Macross going to be a problem release?
Do I think the licensing from Macross will be a problem? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I know the original Macross, it's never been properly released on the state side, at least not anything that's full. I know there's like a lot of complicated history.
Talking about the Macross, the original Macross series, right?
The OG, like
Yeah, there have been box sets in the past. Look, Disney Plus, no one thought all that Macross content would be on Disney Plus. I sure itself didn't. You never know. You never know. Things are, I think it's possible. I think it's possible, but it's still a long, long wait. I mean, it may be, you know, maybe it's optimist in me. But anyway, come by our booth. All right, you'll get a shirt. You'll get something from us. Okay, you get something from us. You, sir, you have any questions? We'll be at our booth fairly shortly. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So, okay, let me ask you let's see. What's your favorite moment, or what's your favorite character? I'll give you a little more options. Who's your favorite character and why? Okay, or what is your favorite funny moment? Okay, this is a favorite question of mine. Luckily, we have no one behind us who are looking at us with daggers in their eyes, so we do have a bit of leeway. So time-wise, but Joe has been thankfully giving us heads up, make sure we stay honest with our time. But if we go over a bit, hopefully we can do so for the time being. But so those are my questions. My favorite question, one of my favorite questions is my favorite funny moment. Okay, let's see. Lisa says on the TACnet to Roy, as this civilian pilot has commandeered one of the Veritechs, has taken over one of the Veritechs. He's not listening to the registry. He's a fraud. She says something along those lines. And Rick goes, "Hey Roy, who's the old sourpuss?" Everyone starts cracking up. Everyone starts cracking up on the TACnet. Who's listening in? Okay. Included not just Roy, but the bridge crew, including Captain Global. Captain Global itself is laughing at this joke directed at his first officer, and then Roy just breaks it. Says, it's like that is our illustrious Commander Hayes, and if you think she's an old sourpuss, then you're not quite as grown up as I think you are. And then laughter continues among everyone, and then Min-Mei chimes in the back seat. "Rick, I think you should apologize. Women her age can get really angry." And then just more fuel to the fire, right? And then then Roy goes, "That's enough. That's enough, everyone. It's and Commander Hayes, that's quite enough. And the old sourpuss, just use that same insult direction to Lisa. So he says old sourpuss more than Rick does in that exchange. So that's, I don't know, it's a funny moment. Anyway, so those are your options if you remember them. Thank you. So favorite character, favorite funny moment, or anything else you want to say, an observation of the series that you want to point out. What do you like? Is that right? She banged that board. You're not saying every time, right? But let me ask you, when it comes to opening titles, because honestly, music, give us when we're at the show, guy where we actually talked to the composers, and Lin Nene herself is both an actress on the show and a singer, right? You agree that the music is so much a big part of Robotech? And the opening title, at least one of the best opening titles, opening credits ever. I know you can argue me if you want. Yeah. But it's pretty darn decent, right? Pretty darn decent. Okay. All right, that's good. I definitely wanted to touch on music. I'm going to play you a video clip featuring Rebecca Forstadt. All right? The text is to something special. Someone kicking this out. Yeah. Anyway, President needs no one kicking us out, but we'll do this one thing, okay? Quickly.
And while I cues it up, I want to thank you two for sticking around to the end of the panel, and I hope to see you back at our booth. We're going to be here all day for questions. I assume Bryant's going to be here tomorrow. Are you going to be here tomorrow? I unfortunately will have to head back to DC for I have other obligations. But again, thanks for sticking around, and I'd like to remotely thank those who stuck around for part of the panel, and Bryant for the opportunity to come down here. I've been largely out of fandom since about 2005 or so. Here we go. I mean, this is at Anime LA. I remember this.
Yeah, Anime LA music panel. Okay, that's my bullet spot. Yeah, unfortunately. Anyway, yeah. So the panel, the host got us doing something for Miss Lin May, aka Rebecca Forstadt, aka Reba West.
First of all, my name is Jason. I have the privilege of being able to review the Scouting album and more than just a question of music here, I just wanted to introduce our panelists. And I didn't say before, but there is a way to participate in missing that part. So everybody, having certainly learned the word. One chance to do it.
Again, thank you very much for coming out, and we will yield the floor to we see some puppeteers in back, and they are coming up next in this panel area. So again, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, we can't appreciate it anymore. And we will see you at I-7 shortly. We have more stuff to share with you. I got more video clips, certainly to share as well. We got material to check out, and we got a few things that are on sale as well. Okay, and ask Joe about possibly getting a sketch, because he does sketches. We had sketches ready as well. So yeah, we'll explore all that once we return to the booth. Okay, I-7.